Welcome once again to Revelation Made Simple seminar. Tonight we're going to study a very important chapter in the book of Revelation. That's chapter 13. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight, so we'll get straight into the book of Revelation, into chapter 13. Before we get to the text, I would like to mention a few things, a small introduction here on chapter 13. We saw in the last presentation, the scene of Revelation 12 concludes with the dragon, who is Satan, with his determination to engage in the final battle against the remnant of the woman's offspring, which we saw in Revelation 12, verse 17. And in order to fight the battle against the woman's offspring, against the remnant, and in order to win the battle, the dragon finds himself two allies. He needed some support, so he finds himself two allies. And these two allies are described in Revelation chapter 13. The first ally is the sea beast, which we will see in Revelation 13, 1 to 10. And the second ally is the earth beast, the beast from the earth, which we'll see in Revelation 13, 11 to 18. Now, I must say a few things here. Although the focus of Revelation chapter 13 is on the final battle of this earth's history, on the final crisis, right at the end of this earth's history. Not all things pertaining the sea beast are related to the end time, okay? Not everything in chapter 13 is related to end time. So that's why some people have a problem putting everything together, because some go back into history, some details, and some go to the future, some, and so on and so forth. So why is this happening? Well, here John is using a very a pattern called identification description pattern that he uses a few times in the book of Revelation. What he does before describing the very role and activities of the sea beast here in Revelation 13 during the 42 months of the Christian age, John first goes to identify this beast in general terms, just in history, okay? Then from verse 8 and onward, he moves to describe the role and function of the sea beast in the final crisis. So before he gives the details about the final crisis and what's the involvement of the sea beast in the final crisis, he goes back in history first to give it a description and identify this beast, and then he comes to the final crisis. So let's get straight into Revelation chapter 13 and start reading. Verse 1 to 10. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him?" Verse 5. And he was given a mouth speaking great things of blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life, of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here's the patience and the faith of the saints. In verse 1, the beast, we see the first beast which comes out of the sea. The beast in Revelation, in prophecy, stands for world empires, and that goes back to Daniel chapter 7. In Revelation, the beast stands as the symbol of the political power through which Satan works actively throughout history to oppress God's people. Then we see that this beast comes out of the sea. Mention of the sea as the source from which the beast of Revelation 13:1 comes is a clear allusion to Daniel chapter 7, verse 2 and 3. Also in Revelation 17, verse 5, the waters symbolically stand for peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So the sea here symbolizes the populated areas of the world. Then it says that this beast had 7 heads. On the basis of Revelation 17, verse 9 to 11, we'll study this a little bit later, the 7 heads, like in Revelation 12, the dragon had 7 heads as well. The 7 heads represent kingdoms through which Satan worked to torment and oppress God's people throughout history, and we'll study those 7 heads in detail when we get to Revelation chapter 17. Then it says 10 horns. Horns stand for political powers. These 10 horns are related to the 10 horns of the 4th beast from Daniel chapter 7, which symbolize the kingdoms that came out after the breaking of the Roman Empire, and those 10 horns later became the European nations. Also, this beast, it says, had blasphemous name. Now, this power claims prerogatives of God and equality with Him. This strongly indicates that while this satanic ally is a political power, it is also a religious power working in opposition to God and His people. Blasphemy in the Bible is defined with 2 things. It's identified with 2 claims. First, claiming to forgive sins, as we find in Mark 2, verse 7, and also claiming to be God, like we find in John 10, verse 33. So this power definitely has a blasphemous name, and it's a religious power because it claims that it has the power to forgive sins, and it is God here on earth. Now, verse 2 also says the dragon gave him his power. The dragon, as we saw in Revelation 12, is Satan himself. So the text suggests here Satan himself is behind this power. Revelation 13, 1 to 4 introduces the first of satanic allies in the final crisis, in the final battle of this earth's history, by giving his general description in terms of Daniel's vision of chapter 7. The beast here combines the characteristics of the 4 beasts coming out of the sea in Daniel chapter 7, verse 2 to 8. We don't have time to read that passage tonight, but if you have some time at home, please read Daniel 7. You'll see a lot of similarities there between the beast in Revelation 13 and what's happening in Daniel chapter 7. So, here, what we see all these beasts, the leopard, the lion, the bear, all of those are presented as empires in Daniel chapter 7, and they are represented as 4 world kingdoms. That was Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Now, the sea beast here corresponds to the power that arose from among the 10 horns, because on this beast here in Revelation 13, we have the 10 horns, so it must be a power that comes after the 10 horns. The 10 horns represents the splitting and dividing of the Roman Empire. So this beast in Revelation 13 must be coming after the dividing of the Roman Empire. So the parallel here strongly suggests that the little horn in Daniel chapter 7 that comes out of those 10 horns is the same power as the sea beast here in Revelation 13, which it has been identified by the historicist scholars as the papal Rome, the papacy. Now let me show you a little bit of comparison here between the little horn of Daniel 7 and sea beast of Revelation 13 to leave no doubt that these 2 powers are the same. We see in Daniel 7, verse 25, that the little horn shall speak pompous or blasphemous words against the Most High. In Revelation 13, verse 6, says the sea beast, he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God. So both speak the same words of blasphemy against the Most High, against God. In verse 25 of Daniel 7, it says that the little horn shall persecute the saints of the Most High. In verse 7 of Revelation 13, it says, it was granted to him, to the sea beast, to make war with the saints and to overcome them. That's the persecution of the true church during the medieval time. And in verse 25 of Daniel 7, we find that the little horn will be persecuting for time and times and half a time. In verse 5 of Revelation 13, the sea beast, the time of persecution will be for 42 months, which is the same time period of 1260 years. So we can see clearly that the little horn of Daniel 7 is the same power here in Revelation 13, which is presented symbolically by the sea beast, which represents the papal Rome, the papacy. In verse 3, we read, one of the heads slain unto death, one of those 7 heads was wounded. The existence of the beast and his activities is identified with his heads, and we'll see that in Revelation 13 very clearly. When one of the heads is mortally wounded, the beast is wounded. So when that wound occurred in history, on February 15, 1798, Pope Pius the Sixth was taken captive, and so that is the historical fulfillment of this prophecy here, that the beast receives a mortal wound. A French general by the name Berthier, he takes the Pope captive during that time, and thus inflicting the deadly wound. For decades, the papacy had little or no influence in the political affairs of the nations. Having said that, if you look in history, the papacy still had some religious power in the backgrounds, and we'll look more into that when we study Revelation chapter 13. Then it says his mortal wound was healed. One of the events that contributed to the healing of the mortal wound, I said that was just the beginning of the healing of the mortal wound. The beginning of the healing process was in 1929, the Lateran Treaty of 1929, when Italian government, led by Mussolini, signed this treaty with Vatican in 1929. And they restored the Vatican City to the Pope, and it restored the power to be a separate nation once again. So the papacy's political status was restored by this treaty. So that's why I call this as the beginning of the healing of the mortal wound, which is still ongoing process until we will see when that healing will take place completely. In verse 5, it says that the sea beast will be persecuting God's people, the saints, for 42 months. The papacy decreed power began in 538 AD, and you see this, we've shown this a few times already. This period of 1260 years is well known in the book of Daniel and Revelation. It's mentioned 7 times in these 2 books. And so if it starts in 538 AD, it will go until 1798. And we just saw that that's in 1798 the Pope was arrested, and that's where the mortal wound was inflicted. And so, although the Pope was in Rome prior to its decreed power over Europe in 538 AD, some people debate this date, 538 AD. They say the papacy was in power even before. Now, it's true that the Pope was there before in power, but the Pope was not set up over Europe until Justinian's decree that the Pope is the head of all the bishops in Christian lands and has the power to prosecute heresy, which he could define as he wished. So here the Pope in 538 AD, Justinian's decree, the Roman emperor gives this decree, and it's enforceable in 538 AD. What happened in 538 AD, one of the tribes, the Ostrogoths, was driven out of Rome and by Justinian, and Justinian gives the Pope the political as well as the ecclesiastical power. So what happens in 538 AD? The Pope gets the political power. He was a religious power, but now he gets this combination of church and state, and the papacy becomes a political power as well. So, having established itself as an institutional power in the 6th century, the papacy dominated the Western world for more than 12 centuries. Let's move on to the second part of Revelation chapter 13, verses 11 to 18. And here the second ally is coming into power. Then I saw, says John, another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is the wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. In this section, John turns his attention to the second of Satan's allies, the beast from the earth. As in the portrayal of the first beast, John first gives us general characteristics of this earth beast in verse 11, and then moves into description of its end-time activities from verse 12 to verse 18. So let's look at that. In verse 11, John says, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth." The other beast came out of the sea. This one comes out of the earth. When in closely related prophecies, the earth is contrasted with the sea, and the sea represents vast populations, as we said, we understand that the earth represents here areas with very limited population. So this earth beast arises in the area of very limited population. Then it says that this earth beast had 2 horns like a lamb. The symbol of a lamb in Revelation always refers to Jesus Christ, except here. There are 27 mentioning of the lamb in Revelation, and 26 out of the 27 times it refers to Christ. So we can understand that the appearance of the earth beast with the 2 horns of a lamb describes this power as Christ-like, having Christ-like characteristics. So it's a Christian nation. The first beast of Revelation 13 has 10 horns with 10 crowns. The second beast has 2 horns but no crowns. The horns are symbols of power or division of power, but if there are no crowns, there is no kingly power. The crowns symbolize kingly power, and this one does not have kingly power. The notable absence of crowns in this case clearly indicates a government vesting its power in the hands of the people, not in any ruling king of monarchy. The second beast is clearly a republic leading the march of democracy. So we're putting all of those hints together until we'll find out who this second beast is here in Revelation chapter 13. Also, it says that this beast speaks like a dragon. The dragon in Revelation is Satan, so this beast speaks like Satan. As the prophets in the Old Testament were the mouthpieces of God, so this end-time power is the mouthpiece of Satan. This is why the rest of the book of Revelation refers to the earth beast as the false prophet, as we'll see in Revelation 16, Revelation 19, and Revelation 20. So how does a nation speak? Well, a nation speaks by its laws, by the laws that it legislates. That's how a nation speaks. Throughout history, whenever the voice of the dragon has been heard, there has been persecution or deception. So if this power is the mouthpiece of Satan, speaks like Satan, at one point in time, this beast will become a deceptive, a persecuting power that will oppose God's people. In verse 12, it says this beast exercises the authority of the first beast before him. Remember, the first beast is the sea beast, the papacy. So the second beast will be exercising the authority of the sea beast. The second beast is connected to the first beast and exercising the same authority as the first beast. That's very important to remember when we get to the final conflict. Throughout the earth history, the sea beast indirectly exercises the great authority and power that he exercised earlier during the symbolic period of 42 months. Thus, the earth beast makes the earth and those who dwell on it to worship the first beast, whose mortal wound has been healed. So the second beast exercising the authority of the first beast to the point where it will be forcing everyone to worship the first beast. So the second beast has a lot of power that will force everyone to pledge allegiance, meaning worship the first beast. Let's move on, verse 13. It says, the beast performs signs, the second beast, which is the earth beast, performs signs that he even makes fire come down from heaven to the earth before the people. Now, the purpose of the signs is to prompt everyone on earth to worship the sea beast. So how do they accomplish that? How do you accomplish this worship to the sea beast? Well, they try to perform signs to persuade everyone to worship the sea beast. These signs remind us of the signs and wonders that the Holy Spirit worked through the apostles in the book of Acts chapter 2 at the day of Pentecost. The bringing down of fire from heaven might be the counterfeit of the day of Pentecost when the tongues of fire came down from heaven upon the disciples. Now, the fire has another allusion in the Old Testament that you remember when prophet Elijah called fire down from heaven. At that time, that demonstrated that God was a true God of Israel and the only one to be worshipped. So if Elijah wanted people to worship God, he demonstrated that God is true God by calling fire down from heaven. Here, the earth beast wants everyone to worship the sea beast. And how do they do that? They're calling fire down from heaven, demonstrating that the sea beast deserves to be worshipped. So here, the beast functions as counterfeit Elijah, who by bringing fire down from heaven is leading people into false worship. The earth beast will counterfeit the work of the Holy Spirit by bringing false revival and false worship. In verse 14, through the deception of these great miraculous signs, the earth beast leads deceived people to make an image to the beast who had the wound by the sword and came back to life. Now, an image is a copy or a replica of some reality. So this image is a replica of the first beast, of the sea beast. We are told that the earth beast will be leading the charge in creating an image to the sea beast, to the papacy. It seems that the text of Revelation suggests here that John introduces a new player to the end-time drama, which is the image of the beast. So when the civil and political powers join the leading religious organizations to enforce a religion upon people, they will form the image of the beast. The characteristics of the final conflict will be the ultimate union of professed Christianity with the power of the state in order to force all people to conform to its decrees. So the lamb-like beast, United States, will side with the sea beast, the papacy, to establish a religious and political union and enforce an institution that characterized medieval Christianity, which was the persecuting power, the one that opposed God's people. Verse 14 also seems to suggest that the sea beast's mortal wound will be completely healed at the time when the image of the beast will be raised. In verse 15, it says that the earth beast, the second beast, which is United States, gives breath to this image of the beast. Now, this portrayal of breathing life into an image recounts Genesis 2, verse 7, where having created man in his image, God breathes into his nostrils the breath of life, and he becomes a living being. That means that when God created Adam out of the dust of the ground, he was just an image only, without being able to function. He just was breathless. And then God breathes the breath of life and enables him to function. He becomes alive. Likewise, the earth beast gives life to the sea beast's image, enabling it to function. That's what it means here. And then we read next that the image of the beast might speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. The way the image will speak, once again, is always through legislations. It's interesting to see here the fact that the image of the beast speaks and causes those who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed demonstrates that the image of the beast is a new entity, is a separate entity, is different from the sea beast and from the earth beast, because it has its own power to legislate, to speak, and to do things, to even persecute people. Having said that, the sea beast and the earth beast will be behind this power. So here in Revelation 13, verse 14 and 15, the text seems to indicate that with the setting up of the image of the beast, we have the beginning of the system that in the book of Revelation later is called the end time Babylon. So, what does the earth beast represent? Who does the earth beast represent? It appears that no single religious or political entity in modern history matches the description of the earth beast as does the United States of America, as we mentioned already a few times. When you look at all the characteristics given here in Revelation chapter 13, there is no other power that matches it the best. It's United States of America. The United States emerged on the historical arena after the medieval ecclesiastical system had received its mortal wound. This nation has become a major dominant power in the world and will play a major role in the final events of this earth's history. In verse 16, we're moving on. The image of the beast says it makes a demand that all earth dwellers receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. In this verse, we read that this new system created by the coalition between the sea beast and the earth beast will force everyone to receive a mark. So the question is, what is the mark? I'd like to guide you through Revelation 13 and find some hints that will give us a better understanding what the mark is. I will provide 7 identifying characteristics of the mark from Revelation 13 and we'll support those with other passages from other parts of the Bible. Let's move through those. The first one, very quickly, the first three are very simple, but are very important. The first one, the mark is a symbolic, not literal. It is not some type of a chip implanted on your hand or forehead, as many suggested. As the beast is symbolic, so is the mark of the beast. Okay? The mark is symbolic, not literal. Second, this is the sea beast, the papacy, not the earth beast, USA. This is the mark of the papacy, not the mark of the earth beast, which is USA. That's very, very important to remember. We need to always look, if we want to identify what is the mark, because it's the papacy's mark, we need to look to the papacy to understand what the mark is. Number three, it is the earth beast, United States, that will force the mark of the beast on the people. The Bible says that he, which is United States, causes all, in other words, forces everyone to receive the mark of the beast. So the final push will be made by United States to raise an image to the beast and then start forcing the mark of the beast. Number 4. We see in verse 16 that people will only receive the mark of the beast after the image of the beast is raised. That means that no one has the mark of the beast today. Okay, we have to be very careful with how we interpret the mark of the beast. When we see what the mark of the beast is, you will understand what we mean by that. But it's very important, and I'll mention it at the end of the presentation, that no one has the mark of the beast today. The mark of the beast, number 5, is about obedience. In verse 16, we see that the mark is received on the forehead and hand. The only other passage in the Bible where something is received on the forehead and hand is found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 8, where Moses commands the Israelites to bind the commandments of God on their hand and on their forehead. This allusion shows clear evidence that the mark of the beast is contrasted with the commandments of God. As the commandments served as the test of obedience to God, so the mark of the beast will serve as the test of obedience to the beast. So the mark is all about obedience. Number 6, the mark of the beast serves as identification. Only those who have the mark of the beast, in verse 17, it says, will be able to buy or sell. It seems that in the final conflict, when the religious observance will be enforced by state legislation, the economic sanctions will be passed to point out the distinction between those who have the mark and those who don't have the mark of the beast. Although along the same line, the mark of the beast serves to show ownership, those who belong to the beast and those who don't. So it shows identification and it shows ownership. Number 7, the mark is the sign of the beast's authority. This is one of the most important points. The last part of verse 17 of Revelation 13 provides 2 identifying characteristics of the mark that deal with the beast's authority. Let's read it again. And that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now I underline the war twice there. In Revelation 13:17, the correct translation actually should be this way. And that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark that is the name of the beast or the number of his name. What is the difference here? The difference is huge. The mark of the beast is placed in opposition to the name and to the number of his name. In other words, the mark of the beast consists of the name of the beast or the number of his name. So the name and the number of the beast help us identify its mark, which is very, very important. So let's look first at the name of the beast. A name stands for character in the Bible. So the name of the beast will help us understand the character of the beast. In other words, what this beast is all about. The reception of the mark of the beast denotes conformity to the character of Satan. Now the question is, what is the name of the beast? We find that answer in the chapter 13 in verse 1. And it says there, and on his head there was a blasphemous name. So the name of the beast is blasphemy, a blasphemous name. As we mentioned earlier, blasphemy in the Bible is identified with two claims. First, claiming to forgive sins, and second, claiming to be like God. Now, knowing that the papacy represents the sea beast, the question is, how does the papacy fit this name of blasphemy? Well, first, the papacy claims that it has the power to forgive sins through confession. Second, it claims that the head of the church, the Pope, is equal to God. Throughout the centuries of church's existence, the popes have regularly claimed to be divine, to be like God. As the supposed successor of Peter, the Pope claims infallibility, the position of God here on earth. Now let me show you a few quotes. And I took these quotes from some previous popes. I didn't take them from outside sources, from the mouth of the popes themselves, claiming to be like God. Cardinal Sarto, who became Pope Pius X, said this: "The Pope represents Jesus Christ himself." In 1302, Pope Boniface says this: "Furthermore, we declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff." What is he saying here? That the only way to be saved is to be subject to the papacy. In the Bible, if you want to be saved, you're subject to Jesus Christ, you accept Christ. Here, salvation is through papacy, it's through the Pope. Pope Leo the 13th said in regards to the Pope, he says this: "We hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty." How much more clear can it be? They claim to be God here on earth. He also said, the last one, "But the supreme teacher in the church is the Roman pontiff, the Pope. Union of minds, therefore, requires, together with a perfect accord in the one faith, complete submission and obedience of the will to the church and to the Roman pontiff, as to God himself." As we can see, it is all about authority. The mark points out that the beast claims to have the power and authority of God here on earth. The blasphemous name reveals the counterfeit authority claimed by the beast. Now let's move on to the number of the beast. Having talked about the name, let's turn our attention to the number of the beast. Remember, both the name and the number of the beast help us identify its mark. In verse 18, it says, "Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man." Here we see that because this is the number of the beast, the sea beast, we need to connect the number of the beast to the papacy. In verse 18, the number of the beast has two characteristics. First, it can be calculated. It says calculate the number, count the number. And second, it says it is a number of a human. It's a number of a man. Let's look at these two characteristics of the number. First, the number can be calculated. It says his number is 666, so we should be calculating this number. One way of finding out what stands behind the number 666 has been used, the scholars have used this very popular method called gematria. Gematria says that each letter of the Greek or Hebrew or Latin alphabet has its own numerical value. So this gives us a clue This gives us a clue how we can understand the number of the beast, which is 666. Going back to verse 17, we find the clue how we can understand and calculate the number of the beast. It says there that it is a number of his name. In other words, the number of the beast, it's related to its name. That's very important. Now, in history, the papacy used many names or titles for themselves. But remember, in order to fit the name used here in Revelation 13 and to connect it to the papacy, it should be a blasphemous name, which claims equality with God. Among the many names or titles that the papacy used, there are two of them that fit here. The two that describes the claim of the papacy to be equal with God. These are Vicarius Christi, which means vicar of Christ. And the other one is Vicarius Filii Dei, vicar of the Son of God. So now, when we take one of those titles, which is Vicarius Filii Dei, and calculate, it's said to calculate the number of his name. So one of those titles, when we calculate the title of Vicarius Filii Dei using gematria, here that's what we arrive to. Vicarius 112, Filii 53, Dei 501, and together, of course, you guess, total will be 666. Now, the earliest record of Protestant writer to suggest this interpretation was Professor Andreas Hellwig in 612 in his work Antichristus Romanus. Hellwig suggested that the title Vicarius Filii Dei was an expansion of the historical title Vicarius Christi. So both of them go together. One is an expansion of the other one. Now, this has been the traditional explanation for many years. But it has created many objections, and many historicist interpreters have moved away from this explanation, from this interpretation. While the use of Vicarius Filii Dei is often denied and its validity even disputed by some theologians, the consistent use of this term, of this title, can be verified in papal canons and other Catholic publications. These usages date back many, many centuries, so the popes did use this title, Vicarius Filii Dei. So it is one of the titles. So if we take the number of his name and calculate it, Vicarius Filii Dei fits the description right there. It comes to 666. Now, this is where we come to the second characteristics of the number of the beast. In verse 18, the Bible says that it is a number of a man. I believe that this interpretation provides another angle to look at this number, and it complements the previous one. We don't have to throw the other one out. We can put them together. In order to understand the number, we must understand the symbolism behind the number. First, you can calculate it, but also we can understand the symbolism behind it. Now, the Greek phrase, a number of a man, can be also translated for it is a human number or a number of humanity. The beast in chapter 13 does not refer to an individual or a specific person in history, but to a human system that stands in opposition to God. Some people have tried to calculate this 666 to some individuals and take their name and calculate it. So, this name fits equals 666. The other name equals 666. But the problem with that is that the system here is a number of humanity, not number of a man specifically. It's number of humanity. So it represents a human system that stands in opposition to God. The humanity of the number directly points to the papacy, because the papacy is a power that claims divine prerogatives, but it is merely a human power. Number 6, being one short of 7, expresses human imperfection without God, in contrast to divine number 7, which expresses completeness and perfection. The number 666 then is a triple imperfection. So the beast of Revelation 13 represents man exercising his sovereignty apart from God. So what is the origin of number 666? The number 666 comes directly from the worship practice of city of Babylon. Babylonian mathematics was based on a sexagesimal system in which the basic counting units were the numbers 6 and 60. We still have the Babylonian measurements for angles like 90, 180 degrees, 360 degrees, and for time, 60 seconds, 60 minutes, and 24 hours. So we still use that system today as well. In addition, number 6 had a religious significance in Babylon. The Babylonians were the principal developers of astrology, and they strongly believed in astrology. In their worship system, they had 37 gods, and one of those, the god associated with the sun, was the supreme over all other gods. These people believed that numbers in some way had power over gods they worship. They counted their gods and assigned a count number to each of the 36 lesser supreme gods, and then added up all of these numbers from 1 to 36 and assigned the sum to the supreme God. So if you add up 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 out to 36, and you assign that total to the 37th God, which was the supreme God, the sun God. The sum of the numbers from 1 to 36, you guessed it, totals 666. Now the people in Babylon feared the gods and worried that one of them might strike them down sometime. So they made amulets with a 6 by 6 matrix of the numbers 1 through 36 on them, and wore them for protection against these gods. And you can see this amulet, one of them, an example of one of them on the screen. The amulets had to be as powerful as possible, so in order to increase its power, they arranged these numbers in such a way that the sum of any given row, any given column, or diagonally is 111. And therefore, the sum of all 6 rows or all 6 columns was 666. The number 666 came about because of the pagan worship practices of Babylonians and their practice of astrology. The practice of creating amulets with this arrangement of numbers appears to have continued well past the time of Jesus, because archaeologists have found amulets with Latin inscriptions. So we know that the Romans were indulging in this practice as well. Now, much of the language in Revelation 13, verse 14 to 11 echoes Daniel chapter 3, where Nebuchadnezzar enforced the worship of the image on everyone. The similarities between these two chapters are very evident. We have the image, we have the number 6. The stature was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, worshiping the image, and we have the death threat. It's very obvious that we have a parallel here, a clear parallel between Revelation 13 and Daniel chapter 3. Revelation 13 tells us that the story of Daniel 3 will be repeated at the end time on a worldwide scale. Just as in the time of Daniel, the worship of the golden image was enforced by a legislative decree, so at the time of the end, the demand to worship the image of the beast will be supported by civil powers and civil decrees. People will have to make a choice: worshiping the image or to remain faithful to God. This is the context that defines the theological meaning of number 666 as the Babylonian number, the number of rebellious humanity. Now we can clearly see that the mark of the beast stands in contrast to the seal of God. The mark of the beast is a counterfeit of the seal of God, and let me show you a few things that will show the evidence for that. Number 1, the seal of God identifies God's people. The seal of God shows ownership. Paul summarizes the seal of God in these words. He says in 2 Timothy 2:19 that the seal of God is this: God knows his own. Those who belong to him, he knows them. Those who identify with him, he knows them. So that's the seal of God. The mark of the beast identifies those who belong to the beast, and the seal of God identifies those who belong to God. The people living at the end time will fall into one of two categories, one of two groups. The worshipers of true God having the seal of God, or worshipers of the beast having its mark. So there is a definite choice: marked or sealed, and that is going to be the choice. The testing truth for the world in the final crisis is centered on the matter of proper worship. Who are you going to worship in the last days? Number 2, a seal is a sign of loyalty and obedience. While the seal of God consists of the names of the Lamb and the Father written upon their foreheads, the mark of the beast consists of the name of the beast or the number of its name written upon the foreheads or hand. As we mentioned before, a name stands for character. So the reception of the mark of the beast or the seal of God denotes conformity to the character of Satan or to the character of God. The Bible tells us that God's law is a reflection of his character. That's how you conform to the character of God or to the character of Satan. If you conform to the character of God, you are obeying God's commandments, because God's law is the reflection of his character. So the demand to receive the mark on the right hand and foreheads evokes God's command to Israel to bind the commandments as a sign on their hands and foreheads in Deuteronomy 6 verse 8, as we mentioned previously. Now this suggests that the demand of the beast to have the mark on the right hand or the forehead stands in contrast to God's commandments, the exchange of obedience to the beast for obedience to God. There is one interesting thing here in Revelation chapter 13. It says that the mark is received either on the forehead or on the hand. Now, the forehead stands symbolically for the mind, and the hand stands symbolically for the actions. I thought a lot why the text uses war instead of and, because in Deuteronomy 6 verse 8 it says that the God's commandments will be on the forehead and on the hand. Here it says that the mark of the beast will be on the forehead or on the hand. One explanation is that obedience only on the level of our intellect, the mind, is as bad as obedience only on the level of our actions. In other words, these are two extremes, and the beast does not care how you give your obedience to it. This has always been the enemy's deceptions, to make us fall into extremes. That is why this is a counterfeit of God's commandments, because God's commandments must be both on the forehead and on the forehand. The obedience to God's commandments is a combination of both. This is why James 2:17 says, faith by itself, if it's not accomplished by action, is dead. And vice versa is true as well. So what I'm saying here, we must be careful not to fall into extremes. God wants us to be balanced in our spiritual lives, and He doesn't want us to fall into extremes. If you just keep God's commandments only in action, just doing the stuff, you fall into legalism, which is wrong, and the beast got you. If you're just saying that, you just have to love Jesus and, accept Him in your mind, accept Him in your heart, and you keep the commandments only intellectually, and you don't put anything into action, the works don't follow your acceptance of Jesus or your faith in Jesus, then that's useless as well. It's the other extreme. So God wants us to be balanced. And if we are on either side of this, then we are on Satan's side. We are not on God's side. Revelation 12-14 emphasizes that in the final crisis, the commandments of God will emerge as the standard of loyalty and obedience. In Revelation 12, verse 17 and 14:12, we find mentioned that obedience to God's commandments will be the identifying mark of God's people in the last days. Now, the context of Revelation 13 indicates that not just any of God's commandments, but rather the first 4 commandments of the Decalogue, those which concern one's relationship with God, are in play here. These commandments will become the central issue in the final crisis. The sea beast activities are portrayed here in Revelation 13 as part of a well-planned strategy against the first 4 commandments. Let me quickly show it to you. First, the beast demands for worship, which is reserved only to God. This is a direct attack on the first commandment. Second, the raising up of an image is a direct attack on the second commandment. Third, the blasphemy of God is an attack on the third commandment. Fourth, the demand for receiving the mark of the beast indicates a direct attack on the fourth commandment, the Sabbath commandment. Now, the fourth commandment stands in opposition to the mark of the beast. The Sabbath will become the testing truth in the final crisis because it deals with the issue of proper worship. Remember, worship is the issue. And so, because the Sabbath deals with proper worship, that will be the testing truth. The Sabbath is an external sign of belonging to true God and the special relationship between God and His people. In Ezekiel 20, verse 20, this text points out that the Sabbath is the sign between us and God. The sign functions here the same as a seal and shows ownership. The Sabbath is a sign or a seal that would belong to God. Let's read it together. Hallow my Sabbath, says God, and there will be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. In other words, the Sabbath is a sign that would belong to God. Here we come to the third point that we've been establishing, how the seal of the mark of the beast counterfeits the seal of God. The third point is a seal shows authority. Exodus 31, verse 16 and 17 says this, therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. And verse 17, it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day He rested and was refreshed. A seal shows the authority of the person who placed the seal. God established the Sabbath at creation as His sign of authority, as the seal pointing to Him as the Creator. The sea beast has counterfeited God's mark of authority with its own mark. How do we know that? We read once again from their own words. The Convert's Catechism of the Catholic Doctrine says this, question, which is the Sabbath day? Answer, Saturday is the Sabbath day. Question, why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? Answer, we observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. In other words, we have the power and authority to do so, and we did it. We transferred the authority from the Saturday to the Sunday, and because the Catholic Church could do it, they did it. Now, let's read another one. The Catholic Doctrinal Catechism by Stephen Keegan. Question, have you any other way of proving the church has power to institute festivals or precepts? In other words, does the church have authority and power to do so? Answer, has she not such power, she could not have done that in which all modern religionists agree with her. She could not have substituted the observance of Sunday, the first day of the week, for the observance of Saturday, the 7th day of the week, a change for which there is no scriptural authority. So the change of the Sabbath into Sunday is the claim that the papacy makes about their authority and power. Sunday became the mark of papacy's authority. Now, in talking about the movement of National Reform Association in the 19th century, the book Great Controversy says the following on page 573. In the movements now in progress in the United States to secure for the institution and usages of the church the support of the state, Protestants are following in the steps of papists. Nay, more, they are opening the door for papacy to regain in Protestant America the supremacy which she has lost in the old world, that's in Europe. And that which gives greater significance to this movement is the fact that the principal object contemplated in the enforcement of Sunday observance, a custom which originated with Rome and which she claims as the sign of her authority. So the change from Sabbath to Sunday is the mark of her authority. Now, this National Reform Association was founded in 1864. They advocated in the past, and it still does today, to amend the Constitution to have United States become a Christian government, acknowledging God as the source of all authority and power in civil government. Now, that on the surface that might seem as a good idea, but it's really not. And I looked into this National Reform Association a little bit because it's very interesting what they're promoting. These are some of their things that they are advocating. First, they're advocating the state has the right to command the conscience of people. That is already taking it too far. That takes away all the freedoms we experience. Second, government must enforce upon all that come among us the laws of Christian morality. Once again, must enforce. That becomes an enforceable power, which takes away our freedoms. Even though it's a Christian power, but it becomes an enforceable power. Third, this National Reform Association, which is a Protestant association, says Jews and all Christians who keep the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, are to be classed as atheists and must be treated as one party with atheists. So the Sabbath becomes a problem there. Now, the Christian Statement is the official magazine of National Reform Association, and in an editorial December 11, 1884, the paper said this, and I want you to pay attention to this quote. We cordially, gladly recognize the fact that in the South American republics and in France and other European countries, the Roman Catholics are the recognized advocates of national Christianity and stand opposed to all the proposals of secularism. Whenever they are willing to cooperate in resisting the progress of political atheism, we will gladly join hands with them. And whenever Protestantism gains control over the civil power, whether with or without the aid of Rome, that will be but to erect an image of the papacy. This is exactly what is happening in Revelation 13. The Protestantism in the United States, when they unite with the papacy, they join hands, and then they gain control over the civil powers. That's when it will happen, the erection of the image to the beast, to the papacy. And so that's when the end-time Babylon is becoming a reality. Let me conclude with this. This is important. I mentioned before, I'll mention it at the end here. No one will receive the mark of the beast until religious legislation is passed enforcing the substitute Sabbath. No one has the mark of the beast at this time. When Sunday keeping is enforced by civil law, every person must then choose between their allegiance to God by keeping the Sabbath according to the commandments of God, or allegiance to the beast by keeping the day substituted by man's authority. So the whole conflict in the last days will be about worship. The mark of the beast and the seal of God will serve as distinguishing mark between the two groups of worshipers. It will separate those who pledge allegiance to the beast from those who pledge allegiance to God. There will be only two sides in the last conflict of the earth's history, those sealed or those who are marked. The rise and advancement of secularism, as we saw in the fifth trumpet, we witnessed that in the fifth trumpet, will set the stage for the last conflict of this earth's history described in Revelation chapter 13. The radical left ideologies, secularism, will eventually lead to a reaction, a pushback from the radical right, which will go to the extreme. This is when Protestantism will unite with Catholicism and will form an allegiance against secular ideology. This will bring up the union of church and state that will lead to a forced state religion as in Middle Ages. This is when the mark of the beast will be enforced by state legislations. So, the choice will be yours. When we go through those conflicts, which side are you going to be on? Which group are you going to belong to? Those who have the mark of the beast and worship the beast, or those who have the seal of God and worship God? I hope you're on the side of those who worship God and have the seal of God in that time. Thank you for watching tonight. Just want to remind you, our website is revelationmadesimple.com, where you can find the notes of our presentations and download them. Or if you have a question, please contact me, email me, and the email is info@revelationmadesimple.com. Thank you, and God bless you.